This is the Working Writer Podcast, episode 53. Hey, welcome to the Working Writer Podcast, the podcast you didn't know you need, but you absolutely do, no matter what. I am your humble host, as always, Brad Staggs, and on the other end of the virtual stream, of course, is producer Dave Bennell, keeping the buttons running, keeping the trains running on time. I can never get that right. So what's going on out in the Frisco area?
Right now we have beautiful weather. It got up to the 90s the other day, which was I was not ready for that.
I really hate you right
now. It's in a beautiful 70s, high 70s range, so it's pretty respectable and nice out here. Family got back from China. They've been for a week trying to adjust to the time. We had been watching a little bit of the NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, Purdue fell yesterday. I think it's my fault. I'm not a big Purdue fan, but I do cheer for Indiana teams. But yeah. I turned on when I turned it on, they were up by like 8. And I'm like, oh my God, we're doing so well. And then from the moment I turned it on, it was a whole show, and they just ended up losing pretty bad.
You didn't knock on wood when you said that, did you?
I didn't. That was the problem.
Yep. Well, this week, I want to thank Dave because, and I've got it right here. This is amazing. He sent me, my birthday was recently. Everybody can give cash and gifts at the address, but this is absolutely amazing. I love this. It's called Vomit Draft. Dave, of course, found it on, I'm guessing, Amazon. It's for those of you who are trying to get that first one between the pages. Hey, this is great. It has outlines for you. And hey, if they want to sponsor the podcast, please give us a call. But they actually go through
that.
I've already been filling mine out because I always have ideas I need to get down on paper. But it goes through, gives you formatting, really nice way of doing it. So if you need something to help you with formatting and getting stuff on paper, now you have to be able to write, not type. It's the only thing about it. But it's called Vomit Draft.
I don't think
the editable PDF will be out next. But thank you so much for that. That is fantastic, and I've already started a new script because of it.
Well, I think I was searching for something, and I had actually typed in Vomit Draft. I think it was the Kitsy one that we had done, and she had never heard that term, and so I was looking it up to see, like, because I've heard it. I'm like, what can I use to visually represent it? And then I went down a whole rabbit hole and actually found it. I'm like, oh, this would be perfect. And then your birthday was coming up, and so I just sent it on over.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Now, going into a subject that we wanted to talk about this week, pitches going badly. Everybody, just so you know, if you are going to write, especially screenplays, novels, at some point, if you want somebody to pay attention to those, you're going to have to pitch them. Now, if you haven't done that, that just means that you get in front of somebody who's an expert in the field or has some kind of power, whether they're an expert or not, and you tell them what your story is. And then they decide the fate of your story, basically, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, you got usually less than a minute and a half to just wow them.
Elevator pitch. You got to have your elevator pitch ready.
Exactly.
So when things go badly, what happens, Dave?
If you cannot convey your story in the way that you feel that to make it makes sense to the people, nobody gets it and nobody cares, and then your movie still is just an idea, and you have to go back to the drawing board and find out, what did I do wrong? Sometimes I've had them before where I pitched an idea and someone says, oh, that's exactly like this movie, and I'm like, no, it's not. And that happened recently with an idea I had. I went in and they said, oh, that's just like this movie, which is something I hadn't seen. And I went and watched the film. I'm like, no, it's not. But it allowed me to tailor my pitch so I could actually make it a little closer to understanding. Because sometimes, yes, it's an elevator pitch. You can't fit a lot of detail, but you have to have enough in there to where it makes sense of the tone and what you're going for.
Now, something else you need to do when you are pitching, and I really hope we hear from some folks on their pitch stories, because there's some really bad ones out there and there's some really good ones. But one of the things you need to do when you're pitching is do some research on who you're pitching to. Do a lot of research, because some of those people won't even be interested in whatever genre you're trying to pitch or wherever the story is. And they will tell you real quick too, won't they?
Yeah. And I've had I have a friend who he does darker dramas and thrillers, but the only category that they do fall in the horror category, but they're not your classic slasher type horror that you see in indie horror genre. So a lot of the horror distribution companies, they go to pick him up and they don't really know what to do with it. They're like, it's a fantastic film, but we don't know how to market this because it's not a gory, slasher fest. This is a psychological thriller with a lot of dark elements. And so like that can be tough, finding the right place for your film. And it's the same thing with film festivals. What we talked about with Tony or Anthony a couple of weeks ago is you have to know your audience and know who you're pitching to. You cannot send, good example, the Heartland Film Festival in Indianapolis. You're not going to get your horror movie in there.
No.
That's going to be more, drama or comedy type feels, but not going to get your slasher in that one.
No.
But if you go to Horror Hound in Indianapolis, probably going to get in there.
And the interesting thing is there are a lot of places out there online. If you're just at your script process, you haven't made your film yet, you can actually go practice your pitch. There's a place called stage32.com, which actually has a lot of folks who are in the industry who will listen to your pitch, give you feedback, take a look at what you're selling. Again, look at who you're pitching to. If you're wanting to pitch a rom-com, that's different from an Adam Sandler comedy, which is different from other kinds of comedy. Look at what they are wanting. Look at what they produced before. If it's not in their wheelhouse, you're wasting your money and your time.
And have a little bit of thick skin.
Oh, absolutely.
Because depending on where you're at, I mean, I've lived on both coasts. You've lived on the East Coast. You've traveled around and been a lot of places. Everyone kind of conveys their opinion differently. And when people ask me like, well, what's the difference between people in California and people in New York? I'm like, the New York people are much more aggressive and harsher with their language.
Yes.
But they're actually friendlier. So but they may come out and be like, this is a piece of crap, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's not really what they mean that it's a piece of crap. They're going to say that this doesn't work here, you should change this, blah, blah, blah. So have thick skin and don't take it so personal, which is hard sometimes because I think a lot of us put a lot of our personality and our personal ideas into these things.
I think they're a lot more open to telling you the truth as to what they think.
And that's what you need.
Which is absolutely, when you're a beginning writer, it's absolutely what you need. Rather than, hey, I'll take a look at it, blah, 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 blah. Just be prepared because you're not going to hit on if you do hit on your first pitch, hey, fantastic. More power to you. But 99.9% of the time, you're not going to. You need to practice your pitch in order to get that timing down. Like we said, it's a very short period of time you have to pitch anything. The other thing that is also important is, why are you the writer for this story? What is it about the story that gives credence to you writing it? Why do you care about it? What does it have to do for you? Put yourself into that pitch because you're selling yourself just as much as you're selling that story or that story idea.
Yeah, and when you're talking about sometimes you don't have enough information and you got to go back to the drawing board, and kind of like our guest this week, you can take that screenplay and next thing you know, you have so much detail that you have a novel.
Right. And speaking of our guest, why don't we go ahead and get on over to Derrick, who's waiting for us, and he's got a lot of great stories to tell. Hey, it is time to sit up and pay attention, dear listeners, because today's guest is an Air Force retiree. Now, I know, before you say Air Force, I understand. I was Air Force. He was part of the badass Air Force. I know, they exist. They really do. They could tear apart a jet engine in the morning and in the afternoon, investigate you and protect you all at the same time. He was also stationed at my old stomping grounds right here. I'm on the wrong side at what's now Joint Base Andrews, was Andrews Air Force Base back in my day. And he writes fiction based on his experiences. So everybody, please give it up for Special Agent Retired Derrick Jackson. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Brad. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, this is all completely my pleasure. I very rarely get to actually talk to an Air Force retiree because very few people actually make it that far in the Air Force. So I get to do it. This is absolutely a fascinating topic, especially with your past and the fact that you used it for your experiences for your book. And we're going to get to that in a second. But the first question I have for you there, and I'm sorry I called you sir out of habit.
That's fine.
Folks, he retired as a Master Sergeant. So Master Sergeant, here's the question I have for you. You join the Air Force. You could have spent your entire career typing on a computer, sitting in a chair. You decide to join the real military side of the Air Force. Why was that? Why didn't you just sit back and enjoy it?
Because of a movie that I saw when I was 11 years old. And even at that time, I had no ambition of joining the military. When I was a senior in high school, we're 3 or 4 months away from graduation, and a lot of my friends have plans of going to college. Some are going in the military, mostly the Army. Some were, planning on working for businesses in the local area. And my cousin, his father was in the Air Force at the time. He was a boom operator on KC-135s. And we were talking, and he said, well, I think I'm going to join the Air Force. And it took me about 10 seconds, and I said, me too. And that quick at 17 years of age, I made the best decision of my life. And so now I'm trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do in the Air Force? And now my mind starts going back to this movie I first saw when I was 11 years old. And that movie was Top Gun. Now, I know that's Navy, but I fell in love with jets from the first time I saw that movie. And I knew there was no way I could be in the Air Force and not be involved with jets. I had to be around airplanes some way, somehow. I had to touch it. I had to smell it. I had to feel the heat coming from the exhaust. There's no way I could work in an office and watch the jets take off every day and not be involved with it.
Why doesn't anybody say Iron Eagle? That came out at the same time, and he was Air Force.
Yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference. I'm Air Force all day, but there's no comparison between those two movies. None at all. It's almost an embarrassment to watch it.
I'll tell you, here's how much older I am than you. I was actually watching Top Gun at the movie theater on Andrews Air Force Base.
Okay.
When it came out.
Okay.
With the Blue Angels in attendance. So
okay. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It was fun to watch. It was fun to listen to him laugh through the movie.
Right.
So unintentionally comedic. But listen, we are here to talk about you and your writing because I'm absolutely fascinated by your entire story. One of the main things I want to know, because this happens with a lot of military folks, vets, people who are in. Did you start thinking about your novel and writing your novel while you were still active duty, or did you wait until you retired to really start getting it laid down on paper?
Yeah, while I was active duty, I had no ambition to become a writer at all. None at all. When I retired, I got a job in corporate investigations. I left because I retired at Andrews, moved to North Carolina, and got a job in corporate investigations with a pharmaceutical company. And I realized I had a lot more free time. There were no more, being on call on weekends, midnight, call outs to whatever crime scene. That was gone. And I had all this free time. I had to figure out how was I going to free it. And I still had all this energy. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was also an agent. We were stationed together at Osan in South Korea. And we were just talking about some of the, the crazy cases, the things that happen on a daily basis. And thinking back to that time, we were both laughing and saying, one day someone should write a book about this because no one would ever believe this crazy stuff. And I never in a million years thought I would be the person to write the book, And so now I fast forward a few years, now I'm retired and I have this time on my hands. I decided, well, let me just see what I can do with this. And initially, I didn't write a book. I wrote it in a screenplay format. Right. And what's crazy, though, that the first thing I wrote wasn't the first book. The first thing that I actually wrote actually became the second book that's getting ready to come out. And so I wrote that screenplay, if you will. And, a few people read it and they gave me some really good feedback on it. And I liked it. But I realized that was kind of an awkward place to start the story because it kind of starts almost in the middle. So I had to go back and write a beginning of it. And the hard part there was trying to create a world where people could, be interested in the characters, show the enlisted side of the Air Force. Because normally when you do see the Air Force in movies, you see fighter pilots, right? Well, the majority of the Air Force is enlisted. If you ever hear anything about OSI, which you normally don't hear too much, you don't know that most OSI agents are enlisted. And so I wanted to show, what it was like to be an agent, the type of work they do, and how these agents manage their daily stresses, not just at work, but how they manage the stress in their life and how those two compete against each other for the time. And so then I wrote the second screenplay, and the feedback I got again was, this is pretty good, but you need a little bit more attention on it. You should turn this into a book. And so now I'm debating, do I really want to spend that much time to develop this story into, a quality book? I like the story. Maybe it's just something I can keep to myself, maybe share it with some friends. But I kind of challenged myself to do it. The scariest day was the first day. I was sitting there in front of a blank Word document, and the cursor is just flashing. It is looking at me, and it's daring me to start writing. And I'm thinking, wow, I've got to write a couple hundred pages here. How do I even start? Where do I start? And how do I develop the characters? How do I do all of this? But after I got past the first page, which I probably wrote 7 to 8 times because I kept deleting and I hated what I wrote. After I got past the first page, I realized how much I loved it. And I never saw it coming. Writing for me became so relaxing that I couldn't wait to get home from work, to turn my laptop on, turn my music on, and just go to a world that I'm creating all on my own.
Now, did you use your screenplay as kind of a
Right.
mock draft outline?
Right.
then?
It was more of an outline for me. Yeah.
Right. When you were writing the screenplay, did you actually do any studying of formatting before you started writing, or did you just lay into it and start going?
What I did is kind of what you said. I went and I got copies of screenplays of movies I was very familiar with. The first one was Top Gun. Another one was Black Panther.
Iron Eagle. No, okay.
Definitely not the Iron Eagle. And so because I was so familiar with those films, the dialogue, and how they were made, it made me a little bit more comfortable in how to write it, how to transition from different scenes, and how to develop the characters, and even how to get them to show emotion without telling you how they're feeling, just showing you how they feel.
Sure. Now, when you had to start turning that screenplay into a novelization, did you have problems getting into the degree of detail that you had to go
I did.
into, or did it just come back naturally?
Yeah, definitely. I was worried about it before I started because on the screenplay it was, the person's name and bam, here's what they say. And on the book, you have to set the entire scene, and you can't just say outside, sunlight or sunset on the beach, and you get right to it. Here, you have to take your time and develop it. What's the temperature? What time is it? How many people are around? What's the crowd thinking that's around your characters? What are they dressed like? And so much detail goes into every scene that you're writing it. And it was a challenge for me in the very beginning because I wasn't sure how to even start doing that. And another thing I was worried about was how to transition, and conversations between the characters. Because, in the screenplay, it's just the person's name when they say this, the next person's name when they say that. Versus you're writing a book and you have to describe how that person said it. Then they pause and this person continues to write. Then the next person comes in, and how do you make that, that conversation as smooth as you can?
Sure. Did I realize you have a large background in jet engine mechanics, then investigation. How many years was it from the time you stopped being a jet engine mechanic, became an investigator, and then retired? How long had it been since you'd actually done anything with jet engine mechanic side of it? And I ask because you start the first book off with an incredible scene of the engine warm-up.
Yeah.
Describing in detail the engine warm-up. Did you have to go back and remember and research yourself all the steps before you could write it down?
I actually remembered most of those steps. So the scene that you're talking about in the very first chapter, the main character is a jet engine mechanic, and before he becomes an agent, he's on the flight line and with his coworkers, fellow mechanics, and they're starting the engines up on the C5 Galaxy. And there's a lot of training that goes into that to be able to be qualified to do that job. First of all, you have to be the Air Force for a certain amount of time. You have to have a certain skill level to get to that. And then they have to trust you to even send you to that school. So when I went, there was a engine run ground school, which taught you all the systems on the aircraft, not just the engine systems, but the entire airplane. And so that was 3 weeks. So if you've ever seen the inside of a transport aircraft, it's full of lights and switches and toggles, and you have to learn what each one of those lights meant, what each of those gauges went, where is it going, what's the pressure, what's going to set this light off, how do you turn it off, not just the engine system. So there's 3 weeks of that. Then I went back for another week and a half of engine run school where we got in the aircraft simulators, and we would just practice, on starting those engines up and going through the emergency shutdown procedures because there could be a fire, there could be an overtemp, anything could happen while those engines are running. So they make sure that you're squared away before you do it on a real airplane. And so because
now for those
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, for those of you listening who've never been in the military, have no idea what we're talking about, what's going on. First of all, look up a C5 galaxy.
Yeah.
Look up the size of a C5 galaxy.
Right.
The word galaxy is in the name of the plane for a reason.
The biggest in the Air
It
Force.
is humongous. And in the first chapter, he describes how the warm-up of the engines could be heard all over base. That is not an exaggeration in any way. Those things are loud. And I couldn't imagine. I was never in the hangar when the engine warm-up was going on. But I could just imagine from your description what that decibel level was like inside that plane.
Right. It was really loud. It's even louder for the person who's standing about 50 feet in front of that plane with his headset on. But it's not helping too much, because when you've got 4 engines producing 41,000 pounds of thrust apiece, operating at 90% thrust, he's not hearing anything. Hopefully he can hear by the time he gets home, because it's going to be very loud. And you push those throttles forward and the whole plane is shaking and you feel the power in your hand. And the only thing that's keeping you from taking off down the flight line is that you hope you remember to set the brakes. Hopefully you did.
Right. Otherwise, you got the kid to hit the emergency brake.
You're going for a ride.
No, it was a great descriptive scene, and I worked Flightline. I was SP, and I worked Flightline many times. And just being there when they go past is an experience. I mean, the sound, everything about them, and I couldn't imagine what you had to do as a mechanic. But in the book, it's a great description, and then the want to go from jet engine mechanic over to the investigative services. Again, for those of you not in the military, who have not been in the military, when we talk about OSI, would it be fair to say those who've watched NCIS, it's kind of equivalent to an NCIS for the Air Force? Luckily, I never had to deal with OSI. Let me say that first. And still haven't until now. Yeah. If you produce some papers from when I was in the Air Force, then this is over. That's all I got to say. But for those of you who've not heard the term, OSI is what you would think of as NCIS on TV, if you will.
That's probably the closest description. Both OSI and NCIS have a criminal investigative mission and also a counterintelligence mission, which differs a little bit from Army CID, which only has criminal investigations, and in Army, the military intelligence has the counterintelligence, but OSI and NCIS can do both.
Correct. The description you had to use in the book to get people to understand why anybody would want to be OSI in the first place, because they are, once you become OSI, being a security police, you weren't really outcast. You weren't castigated from the rest of everybody. But once you get OSI, you're kind of looked unfavorably in some circles. So the fact that you put that in the book and you talk about that, I really love, because that really is a thing in the service.
Yeah. And that ostracization happens to a lot of people. It definitely happened to me. Mm-hmm. What was a little strange for me is when I got recruited, I was at Tyndall Air Force Base and I was working F-15s at the time in real life. Mm-hmm. I get recruited to OSI. I go to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. 6 months later, I come back. Well, most people get PCS to a different base to start their career as an agent.
Right.
But they sent me right back to the base that I had already been stationed at for a year and a half.
Wow.
And so there are people who knew me as a jet engine mechanic. And so now I'm back and I'm not wearing, at the time, BDUs, right? Now I'm wearing a suit every day, and I got a SIG on my side, and a gold badge on my hip. And they're looking at me like, what happened to you? And they realize what's going on. And some of them were thinking, well, were you an agent this whole time? You were working on the flight line? Were you undercover? And you started getting some side eyes, and you realize that a lot of people see you and kind of cross the street, don't want to speak to you anymore. So actually I won't say I lost a lot of friends, but I did lose quite a few acquaintances,
You kind of learn who's on your side at that point.
Right.
Sure. Now, you say the book, and I could tell, comes from a lot of your real life experiences. How do you draw that line where you may want to put a real life experience you had in the book, but then you have to sit back and go, wait a minute, there's a few people that were there who may recognize this situation. How much did that happen in your mind? How much did you have to change, the situations in order to make them something for the book?
The first book, it was constantly changing. Mm-hmm. Because obviously I would change the names of the people, and I wouldn't I didn't rely on specific investigations. So what I did is I took a little bit from several investigations and put them together to make one big story. Number one, like you said, I wanted to protect people's privacy, and number two, I wanted to be able to tell a story that people could follow. Because if I wrote about 20 different investigations, it's going to be hard to follow. But if I write about 3 or 4 and put them all together, somehow, there's a bad guy in the middle of all these things that are happening, and it all comes together towards the end of the book. Now, even though it's still based on true events that happen, I just kind of mixed it up a little bit just to, take care of people,
Well, you subtitled it based on a true story. So there are people like me going, okay, which part of this is what I would think is true? Because just like me, I'm sure you have stories that you're never going to put in the book because people would think they are so fake that there's no way they could be true. But I will tell you, the book number 1 was an absolutely amazing read. I had so much fun reading it. I can't wait to get book number 2, which, as we're recording, comes out this weekend. By the time this is out, you can go onto Amazon and get your own copy of it as well. Get a copy of the first book and the second book. I can't wait for it to come out. It's going to be a great read.
Oh, hi. Hey, this is future Brad, or past Brad. I can't really keep that straight. Just interrupting you for just a minute to tell you about our sponsor, Fiberglass Freak's Batman Museum. That's right, an actual museum dedicated to the 1966 Batman TV show. What could be better? It's right here in Logansport, Indiana, and it is an amazing place. Mark Rakup, who owns the place, is actually DC and Warner Brothers' only official builder of 1966 Batmobile replicas. I'm not talking some little toy. I'm talking about a full-size working car. And you can go to the museum and see some of those right now. Plus all the toys from when you were a kid, everything dealing with Batman, especially the 1966 show. Go on in there, and if you go in there and tell them that the Working Writer Podcast sent you, you get $2 off your admission right now. So go in. You have no excuse not to go. So let's go back to the show. I'm sure it's more interesting than I am. So watch the podcast and then get to writing.
Because you had a government job and because you had a clearance job, when you write a fiction novel after having a clearance job, do you then have to get it vetted?
Absolutely. So when I finished writing the book and I was comfortable with that draft of it, before I could even send it to an editor, I had to send it to the Department of Defense. I think it's Office of Publication and Review.
Correct.
And they go through and then they send it to the Air Force, and I'm sure the Air Force sends it to OSI, and they check it to make sure there's nothing in there that's classified or something that they're not comfortable being released. With the first book, the process was 5 months, and it came back and no recommended changes because, the first one is more criminal investigations, and I was able to kind of move some things around. The second book, it took a little longer. It took 6 months. But the second book is focusing primarily on counterintelligence. So I kind of figured it might take a little bit longer. And there were a few recommended changes, not many, but a few to kind of change the name of some organizations that were involved in the real life events that I included in the book. But, the recommendations were easy to make just to make sure we're just being responsible.
Now, how long did it take when you first sat down to write the screenplay, because that was first? How long did it take you from the time that you decided to write this until you actually finished that first draft?
The very first one, it probably took me about 2 months.
And that was just going straight through, no outline, just point A to point B straight through.
Right. Trying to figure out what story am I trying to tell, and, trying to figure out, well, how long does this have to be? Which characters from, the real events do I want to include versus which characters do I need to make up from a fictional version to make the story make sense. And so, that kind of took me a while to kind of figure out how do I want to tell it. And then once I decided to turn that screenplay into a book, that process probably took me another 2 months because even though I had the outline, I had to go into a lot more detail to tell these background of these characters, where they came from, why they do what they do, and, why they feel the way they feel about certain things.
And because this was your first time formatting, writing out and everything, because of the subject matter, you couldn't just throw it over to somebody and say, here, edit this for me or tell me what you think. You had to rely a lot on yourself for this one.
I did, as far as the story. So I mentioned my friend earlier. who he and I were stationed together at OSI. So he is probably the first person I talk to as I'm writing. And I'll say, hey, I'm thinking about writing about this or telling the story this way. You know, it's been a minute since this actually happened. How do you remember it? Just to make sure, you know, my memory was correct. And once we're on the same page with what actually happened, then I determine, you know, how do I want it to happen in the book. About 65% of what's written in the first book actually happened in some way. But I did have to, you know, try to decide how am I going to tell it in a way. First of all, how am I going to get this book approved, right? How do I get the OSI and the Air Force to allow me to release this? So I had to be very careful about how I wrote it, and then creating characters to tell the story versus, you know, talking about the real people who actually did those things.
Exactly. And I would assume now you've got the second book that is coming out or is out by the time people are seeing this. So that was from the first screenplay you did.
Right.
Just very expanded by this point.
Right.
So you using the screenplay as a great outline. Are you ready for the third book without a screenplay to go from?
Well, I've already written it. I wrote it.
Never mind.
I had some free
the
time.
question is mute.
I had some free time. So when I published the first book, I went out and I did a little promotion for the book. But I was so excited to get back to writing that I came right back and I started writing the second book. And when I finished writing the second book, because it took so long to go through the review process with the DoD, I went ahead and started writing the outline for the third book because I really like the story. And so I'm gonna do my job this year and take some time to promote the book and the series properly. And I'm saying probably won't start writing the third book until maybe the end of the year, beginning of next year.
That, to me, this is something that I think, especially for beginning writers, is something that's really good to remember. He had to take it from a screenplay to a book. So there was already a self-written outline in there. If you've ever written a screenplay and tried to adapt one to the other, there's an outline for you to use. Ended up the first screenplay becomes the second book. But again, being able to know in your head when you have a good beginning, when you have a good ending, and be able to adjust that on the fly is a sign of a really good writer. And as he said, he started writing the outline for book 3 before writing the book, because outlines will help you, however you have to do the outline.
Right. You're absolutely right. And I'll tell you what else helped me with the outline. I'm sure it helped me as I write the book. It's some feedback that I've gotten from readers of the first book. And I'm sure some feedback that I'll get from the second book. Some people maybe wanted to see a little bit more about this or were surprised that certain things happened. And then as I think about it, you know, there are ways that I can touch on those subjects, you know, in the second book, which I did, and of course in the third book as well. But, you know, having that outline, it doesn't make the writing easy, but it makes it a little bit easier.
When you are writing, especially whether it's screenplay, and luckily you've already got the screenplays done, so you're ready to go straight to Hollywood now. But whichever one you're writing, how do you separate the character voices in your head? Do you have to hear somebody else's voice in your head as you're writing it? Or are you good at separating the way people talk?
When I'm writing characters, I kind of base the characters on real people. Even if they had absolutely nothing to do with the story. So one of my partner in the series, Shadow One, is based on my friend who was stationed with me at OSI. So his personality is in the book. There's a love interest in the book as well. Her personality is based on one of my friends I've had for the past 20 years, you know, just because her personality fits that character. So I can kind of take, you know, how do I think she would react if she was in that situation? And then there are characters that I created that have, you know, of course, had absolutely nothing to do with it because they're fictional characters. But I imagine people either that I know or social media people that I watch all the time. Maybe there's comedians. And I think, well, this person would fit very well if this was a movie. I could see them playing this character. And so now when I'm writing, you know, those conversations, I hear that real person saying these words. And it helps me, you know, being able to tell their story. You know, sometimes you see people on social media laughing, sometimes you see them sad. But it helps me to be able to describe that person's emotions and tell their story better when I imagine them as a real person.
We're going to put this out in the universe right now. Movie comes out. Who's playing Devin?
I would say a younger Michael B. Jordan.
Nice. Yeah.
A little bit younger.
A younger and cheaper. He's won the Oscar now.
Right.
So
much cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could definitely see that. Absolutely. Just have to find a new, younger Michael B. Jordan now.
Yeah.
But that is fantastic. You had the second book. The second book took 6 months to clear. It's out now. Are you doing your own cover art for those, or are you hiring that out to be done?
Well, I did the original designs, and then I found a professional to make it look much better than I could. So I kind of put it together and said, "Hey, here's what I'm thinking of. You take it from here. Here's the colors I would like to have in it, and it comes back a lot better than what I had originally. But it's still based on initially what I sent them.
Sure.
Yeah.
So in book 1, Devin has become OSI. Goes from jet mechanic to OSI. Is he still OSI in book 2?
Yes.
Do we keep with that?
Yes.
Okay.
So book 2 picks up a year and a half after the end of the first book, which ends, in South Korea. And the main character, Devin, is neat to see because he is not the same person from the first book. So there are a lot of things that he had to endure. There's some tragedy that he had to deal with. And because of that, he is much more of a speak his mind type person, no nonsense type person.
Sure.
And he has gotten away, which was in line with my career in OSI. He has moved away from criminal investigations, and he's now in counterintelligence. And he's on a special team that is assigned to Air Force Special Operations Command. And so their job is to embed with some of these special operation forces units at Herbert Field and around the world, learn where these guys are going to be going, because a lot of times they go overseas and, sometimes it could be training, the military of other nations and other things. But when they know in advance where these units are going, they will go before the units and do threat assessments. What are the safest routes, the best places to stay, who are the people at the embassy that you need to know, who are the local police, the local military, and just contacts within the area. They would bring that threat information back, share it with the unit that's going to be going for the main deployment. And depending on where they're going and the threat level, they could actually go during the actual mission and kind of sit back a couple of layers to detect if anyone is actually watching the American forces. So that's his job. While he's trying to do that job, without saying too much, let's just say an American airman vanishes in Africa. Devin just happens to be around, and his job is to figure out where he is. And he has to earn the trust of 2 feuding African warlords who, although they are at odds with each other, they definitely don't want to talk to him because he is not African, he's African American. And the way they think is, you may look like us, but you're not one of us. You're more American than you are African. And so he's got to find a way to win their trust, while at the same time trying to repair a romantic relationship he had with a Nigerian intelligence agent who is pretty much the only person that can get him the information that he needs. So there's a counterintelligence search and rescue mission going on. There's a little bit of romance. There's some cultural discussions going on as well. There's a lot of action. There's some laughs. There's some things that are going to have you sitting on the edge of your seat.
Oh, that's fantastic. The interesting question that a lot of people love to know, especially from first-time novelists, when you saw that novel finally off of Amazon, however you got it, however you saw it published for the first time, how'd you feel just seeing something you created?
My mind was blown. Even before I saw it on Amazon, when I ordered my first author copy, I had a hard time opening the box. I pulled the wrapping out of the box, and I just stood there holding this thing in my hand, thinking of how long it took, not just to write it, but I lived a life that went into the book. And then, the hard work that took into writing it, the editing it, the book covers, the audio book, all that work was done. It was in my head, and it's always going to be there. Even if no one bought it, my kids would have it. Their kids would have it. And so it was quite a moment. And then when you see it on Amazon, and when you look it up online and you see how it's being distributed into the other places, other countries around the world, it's quite an amazing feeling.
I think when you realize you have your own ISBN number, it becomes real.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love talking to people about that first time feeling, because all of you who are struggling to get the words on the page, as he said earlier, sitting there with the prompt looking you in the face is the hardest time to write. Whether it's a blank page, whether it's that prompt, you just have to do it. If you had some advice for these beginning writers who were just wanting to get it down and hopefully get published someday, what would it be?
I would tell them to figure out what story you want to tell. Who do you want to tell that story to? How do you want to tell it? And then tell it.
Simple, fantastic. can tell you were in the military. To the point. Where can people find you online?
You can go to my website, derrickmjackson.com. You can find me there. My books will be there as well as on Amazon.
Isn't it nice to say books will be there?
Yeah, this is new for me. Books, this is brand new. Excited for the second one to come out.
So are you going to go on a tour now? You going to go on a book tour?
I would like to. But right now, I'm just working hard to make sure this thing gets published this weekend. And after that, I'll see what comes next.
There you go. Well, hopefully everybody can go out and meet Derrick wherever he may be. We'll find a Borders or Barnes & Noble. It's still open, and we'll get him in there. But we'll get him out there, and everybody get out there and order the first book now. Order the second book. I have to wait, 48 hours or so before I can do that.
Right.
So, but go out and get those, because I can tell you from personal experience, the first one is a fantastic read, especially if you've ever been in the military. If you haven't been in the military, it's a great read because it'll explain everything that you missed by not being in the military. So, Mr. Jackson, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Love the book. Can't wait to read the second one. Can't wait to read the third one. And then can't wait to see a young Michael B. Jordan in the film version.
Brad, thank you very much.
So,
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Okay, I will now say, having retired from the military, Dave was in the military, using your personal experiences to write that fictional novel, even if it did start as a screenplay, is an amazing thing to do, especially if you have experiences that you want to share. Have you been putting your military time into what you're writing, Dave?
Mostly comedy stuff, just
of
because
course. Yeah.
I don't think some of the stuff I dealt with in the military, I don't think you could tell it in a serious fashion and people would take it seriously. I often joke when people are like, what's the most realistic military film you've ever seen? And they're like, is it Full Metal Jacket? Is it, Jarheads? Like, what is it that's the one? And I always say it's In the Army Now, starring Pauly Shore, is about as close as you can get to my military experience.
And see, you go to Pauly Shore, I go straight to Stripes because of my age.
Yeah, well, they actually filmed at the same base where I did my basic in AIT at Fort
Sure.
Sill. So I actually recognized everything there. So when I saw it, I think I watched it as soon as I got back from AIT. And it's the first time I've seen it in years. And I'm like, oh my God, it just chills to this day. It just brings memories. I'm like, everything still looks the same.
And no matter what, I will defend Iron Eagle until the day I die. And I want to hear from other people who loved Iron Eagle. By God, Cousin Oliver was in Iron Eagle. You have to love that.
I'm in talks right now to buy the rights
I
to
hope
Iron
so.
Eagle. And the remake will be coming. We're gonna get a part for you in there. I don't know what you're gonna play.
I'm gonna be the old mechanic who ruins everything and everybody crashes because of me.
It could be, yeah. Well, I mean, that's needed.
I think it's a very necessary part.
But anytime you can take, regardless, even if you weren't in the military, anytime you can take your personal experiences and make that part of your story, it I don't know. I think it gives you a little bit more passion about it, because it's like it's not, this is my life story, but this is right. Something that I've lived through and I'm a subject matter expert on.
Well, I think I love it because, again, like I was saying in the pre-show, you have to put yourself into, why are you the one to tell this story? And I've written 3 different TV pilots that revolve around military people or former military people, just because, well, it's what I know. And it's easy enough to say, well, I have an inside scoop on the world I'm writing about. And it doesn't have to be military. Kevin Smith made an entire career out of a guy who works in a
Quick Stop.
Alzheimer's is a bitch. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, but think of the amount of new conversations you'll have every day with people that you may or may not have met.
That's true. I can't wait to meet you again next week.
Absolutely.
It'll be good. So right now, I just want to thank Derrick for talking to us. His book is fantastic. Please go out and get it on Amazon whenever you can. It's a good read. It really is. And now the second one is out, and he's going to have the third coming out pretty soon. So I'd call that a good thing to go out and read. But just like he did with taking his experiences, you can take your experiences and write too. You can make the book, you can make a screenplay, you can make a play, poetry, whatever you want. But the first thing you have to do is actually open up a page on the computer, open up a blank page with a pen, and actually write. That's what you have to actually sit down and do. we're here for you. We're here to talk about it. Give us a shout. Send us an email at workingwriterpodcast@gmail.com. Leave us a message here, wherever you're listening to this, wherever you're watching it. Let me know. Let us know how you're doing. Let us know what you think, because we want to make sure that your motivation is going and you get to writing, okay? Until next week, make the most of your time and just keep writing. Remember, writing is more than just a job. It's a passion. Pay your bills, but follow your passion. Now, get to writing.